In the other room, I am going to be projecting, so a word to the sound man, you might want to turn it down. Just in case you haven't noticed, the sound doesn't work in here. But it does work in there, which is why we're still speaking into the microphones. So if you're thinking, hey, moron, it's not working, it kind of actually is working. I think I know why. We usually sit in this row, and we moved over there. So I'm sorry. For those of you who this is the first time here, you're visiting, please come back next week. It's going to be better. And unfortunately, even though the sound helps us sound better, the video can never be helped. Now, next week, we have the opportunity to hear from Brad Hoffman. I just want to let you guys know, we still want to hear multiple voices. We don't want just my voice expounding the word. We want to hear from multiple people. So next week it is going to be Brad Hoffman, and I am excited to hear him take us through the book of Galatians. Less and less of a verse-by-verse study, more of a larger, bigger picture, maybe a full chapter per sermon, and that'll start next week. We are also going to get Josh Greenslade going, probably in November. Maybe a Thanksgiving message. Yay. We are going to be in Mark chapter 11. Lots of technical difficulties here. Starting in verse 27 is where we're going to be. This is last week's notes. There we go. Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 27. By the way, I don't know if anybody here is distracted today. Is it distracting? You know, the purpose of a church service is to decrease distractions. When we come together, we pray together. We sing together. We study the Word together. And the purpose is to get our eyes on to Christ. So today, we have a lot of distractions. So where sometimes it's just the staff or just the music leaders or just the people praying who are engaging in decreasing distractions, we all get to participate today in decreasing distractions. So let's concentrate together. Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 27. And they came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him. And they said to him, "By what authority are you doing these things? Or who gave you this authority to do them?" And Jesus said to them, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me." And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why then did you not believe him?' What shall we say? But shall we say from man?" They were afraid of the people, for they all held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." And he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a pit for the winepress and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. When the season came, he sent a servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. And they took him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Again he sent them another servant, and they struck him in the head and treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and him they killed, and so with many others. Some they beat, some they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. Finally he sent him to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those servants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read the scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. So they left him and went away. Last week we looked at the fig tree, the fruitless fig tree. And this week we're going to look at who's responsible for that fruitlessness. The illustrations are combined. Everywhere in the Old Testament where the fig tree is used as an illustration of Israel, it's actually the second in a line of two. Israel is my vineyard, my fig tree. That's how it's always stated in the Old Testament. And so we continue today with some questions. Some people have asked me, how do you study the Bible? How do you prepare for sermons? And I tend to just ask it questions. You know, you ask the Scripture questions. So we're going to ask 3 questions today. Who is in the conversation? What is the conversation about? And now then what? Are there any implications to this conversation? By the way, I'm going to have to just say this out loud so I can get it out of my brain. In the 1880s, Charles Spurgeon spoke to 23,000 people unamplified for an hour. He probably needed a glass of water. No, actually, I'm going to make it. My fear was actually taking a glass of water, I'd choke on the water and lose my voice. When they were preparing the auditorium for this special service, he stood up on the platform that they were going to be speaking from, and just to practice, he said, he cried out in a loud voice, "Behold the Lamb of God who taketh away the sin of the world." And there was a guy up in the balcony who did not know Spurgeon was there. He thought it was God's voice. He left his tools, he went home, he was sick in bed for weeks, and he finally gave his life to Christ. Totally unrelated to the sermon, but I have to get it out of the brain. So the 3 questions. Who is in the discussion? Jesus, that's an easy one. Look early on, though. The chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Who is missing from that list that you expect to be in that list? The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, the Essenes, these other political groups. They're missing from the list, and we know they're missing from the list because if you skip ahead, chapter 12, verse 13, right, this is after our text today, they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians. So in our discussion today, the Pharisees aren't there. Not a big deal, except for the fact that these 3 groups, chief priests, elders, scribes, you know who they are? These are old groups. These are old groups. When did the idea of the chief priest begin? Giving of the law. They were not in the land yet. They did not have kings. The law, they were about to start wandering in the wilderness when that came about. Scribes. Now this word is an interesting one. They seem to be some form of a paralegal or a lawyer. They were a law expert. Their job was to write things down, recite things. Essentially, you know, Josiah, the super young king, when it came time for him to step into office, it was basically the scribes who came and they read the law to Josiah. The scribe's job was to be an expert in the law. What about the elders? When's the first time we see elders? I don't know about the first, but do you remember Exodus chapter 4, 5, somewhere in there? Moses is sent from herding sheep back to Egypt. He talks to Aaron first, and then he and Aaron, they go and they talk to who? The elders. And then they go talk to Pharaoh. The reason is the elders were a governing body whose job was to interact between whoever's in charge and the people. So by the time we have elders here in Jesus' time, the elders' job was to communicate from the clans or the families back to the religious leadership and vice versa. These are the 3 groups that we have. Old groups. What about the Pharisees? When do they show up? They're a young group. They're a new group. And we'll deal with that issue later, but it's important to keep that in mind. But with these three groups, as chief priests, scribes, and elders, their responsibility was to make sure that the people walked rightly before God. They were decision makers to make sure, for instance, the temple was doing its job. Why was the temple the way it was when Jesus showed up? Because these three groups had made it that way. When Jesus comes in, which we talked about last week, and cleanses the temple, he is tearing apart the things that these three groups had built. This abuse of the Gentiles, this rejection of sacrifice. They were abusing the people. Did they have the authority to set up the temple the way that they wanted? Actually, yes. Those three groups were appointed by God to lead the people. They had the authority to do what they were doing. Does that make it okay that they did it? Well, that's in our next question. By what authority do you do these things? The question, that's verse 28. They came to him, by what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them? They're wanting to know because they had the authority to set it up the way that it was. Why did you come in and ruin what we set up? Why did you do that? Who gave you the authority to do this? Which, by the way, he actually does answer this question. It's at the end of his parable. He's going to get to it eventually. He's not just being evasive. But he still asks the question. All right, if you're interested in authority, there's a buried question in there. Who do you work for? All right, three groups. Who do you work for? Did John the Baptist come from God or from man? Right? The people already thought John was a prophet. If they're right, who sent him? God did. If John the Baptist is the Elijah that the Old Testament had promised, he has the authority by God to come and do these things. The answer should have been easy. If these three groups who are holding the authority that God had given them and were actually intent on what God wanted, they would have welcomed John in with open arms. God's plan, paving the way for the Messiah, welcomed John in, right? But did they? No, they rejected John. Well, what was he doing? Was he teaching some falsehood? What was John teaching? Repent. What's wrong with that message? Repent. It's the same message the prophets have been giving Israel since the time that they started showing up. Repent. Turn from your sin and turn back to God. There was nothing wrong with John's message, but it offended specifically these three groups. They had the authority, but they were not interested in who gave them that authority or what his plan was. They just took the authority and abused people with it. So he asked the question, was it from God or from man? And what answer did they give? We are too cowardly to say anything. Say it, dude. What's the answer? Did it come from God? Did it come from man? They were unwilling to say anything. It reveals their heart. They just want authority. They're not wanting to see God's plan spelled out or played out. So, we get to the parable, right? They're not willing to answer. So, chapter 12, verse 1. He begins to speak to them in parables. Who's the them? The three groups. A man planted a vineyard, and we have this long story. The story he's telling is actually the kind of story that existed during their time. A rich person would come by, he would buy a plot of land, he would build some sort of a fence around it, maybe a hedge. He would set up all the stuff that vineyards need. Cool. And then he doesn't want to run it himself, he's a rich guy. So he hires somebody else to run it, and then the owner goes to his villa somewhere else, right? Who owns the vineyard? Well, the owner does. So, who owns the fruit of this vineyard? Well, the owner does. There's almost this point where he owns the managers themselves. So, in the description that Jesus is giving in this parable, this is not a foreign concept to them at all. Okay? But in it we find this drastic move on the part of these tenants. Right? How does this make sense? Here I am working the farm when the owner sends a servant and I beat him and send him back. That's kind of weird, isn't it? And yet, isn't it also arrogant? The servant who is sent carries the authority of the land owner. So if somebody else comes in with authority over me, I now have to answer to that person. So I beat him and I send him away. Another servant is sent and I strike him in the head and I send him away. And then yet another one comes, I just kill him. I don't even get to send him away. I just kill him and throw him out. It finally gets to the point where the son of the owner comes, which, all right, just for a second, if you're a tenant and the son comes to talk to you, your immediate thought is the owner is already dead. If I kill this guy, the land belongs to nobody. In Jewish law, it then goes to the head servant. So their thought is, there is no owner left back at home. The owner, the son, who is the heir, is now here. If I kill him, it's all mine. Not just the vineyard, the fruit of the vineyard also. That's their thinking. That was actually a legally supported thing. And the way it's written, it apparently would happen. But Jesus is not talking about an actual vineyard. Everybody catch that? If we turn to Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah 5 gives us a really good hint about what this vineyard is. This is the beginning. This is actually before Isaiah's call. He's going to be a prophet, and yet Isaiah 5 verse 1 through 7 is an interesting perspective, an interesting story. Isaiah 5:1, let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. Okay, does that sound like the parable Jesus just told? Okay? Should sound familiar. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I tell you what I will do with my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Watch verse 7. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. Right? So what's the vineyard? Israel. As clear as can be. What do you want from a vineyard? Grapes. So here's the fruit. He looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, an outcry. Now we have a play on words here. He's this owner of the vineyard. He's got this vineyard, and he's looking for fruit. In the original text, justice and bloodshed sound like the same word, and righteousness and outcry sound like the same word. He looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed, and for righteousness, but behold, an outcry. He looked for these things. What's he looking for again in the vineyard? Fruit. What's the fruit of the vineyard of Israel? Justice and righteousness. The treating of one another in justice and the walking before God in righteousness. That's what the fruit of the vineyard is. We go back to Mark 12. Jesus comes in a day before this. He sees the fig tree. He curses it for fruitlessness. He goes into the temple. What's he expecting to find there in God's vineyard? Justice and righteousness. They are abusing people and walking in idolatry. There was no fruit to be found there of any benefit. There was still the results of actions. That's what fruit is. Was it good fruit? Was it a harvest of good grapes? It was wild grapes. You know what the problem with wild grapes are? They're disgusting. They're gross. It's like the difference between an apple, your favorite apple, and then, oh, look, another fruit tree, and it looks like it has baby apples on it. And you go and you take one of those little crab apples, and you pop one of those in your mouth. Anybody tried that? There's a distinct difference between a cultivated, fruitful apple tree and a crab apple. Still fruitful, the fruit is worthless. It's wild, it's worthless. That's what the issue is here. You see Israel, they're actively doing things. They're going about being religious. These three groups, they're encouraging Israel to do something. When Jesus shows up, it is perverted fruit. There's something wrong with it. So it still comes back to the question, by what authority, Jesus, do you come in and ruin the things that we've done? Okay? Let me tell you, the owner of the vineyard gave you guys the authority to make this vineyard fruitful, and you guys resulted in wild grapes. That's what this discussion is about. So he ends with his own little question. What will the owner of the vineyard do? What will the owner of the vineyard do? Have you ever seen in your own life or in the life of the people around you, when they are stuck in a lie or in sin or in foolishness, how arrogant we all are to think that we're going to get away with it? Especially if you're talking about sin. Who are you hiding it from? God? You honestly think you're going to hide your sin from God? And yet we still, in our sin, we walk around as though it's a secret. The fruit of our life is obvious in God's sight. You see these guys? Who are they hiding their sinful leadership from? They honestly thought they could get away with this. If we just kill the son of the owner of the vineyard, it can be ours. What does it mean, ours? If you look at the fruit of Israel, walking in justice and righteousness, that plays out as a worship and a praise to God, the owner of the vineyard. But what happens if it's owned by these three groups? The worship and the praise goes to them. Their desire, their heart's desire was to be praised by men. Let me tell you, that continues today in the church. It continues today. In fact, Jesus warned his apostles, beware of the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees. Do you remember that warning? That was just a couple of chapters ago. What is that yeast? The pride that comes with abusing a position of leadership. And it's still a warning today. So does Jesus just come in and tear everything apart and leave? Does he leave it to its own problems? Actually, no. Verse 10. He had asked the question, what is the owner going to do? He's going to kill the tenants. Verse 10. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. What's he talking about? We were talking about a vineyard. Where's the stone in the vineyard? There actually is no stone in the vineyard. He's doing something you're not supposed to do. He's mixing illustrations. So we'll turn to Psalm 118. And we're going to see the quote that he gives to these people. By the way, there's sarcasm dripping in this question. Have you never heard it said? These three groups have heard that verse quoted maybe every Sabbath day. Psalm 118, it's at least once a year. Psalm 118 is the celebration song for the temple. Probably written, and we've covered this before, back in the day when they finished building the temple. Rebuilding the temple. All these things are great and amazing and beautiful. Psalm 118, verse... Well, we'll go to 19. Let's say somebody's come into this new temple. He would say, open to me the gates of righteousness that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. Thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. The song was saying, this stone in the song is actually Israel. Israel had been beaten and condemned and enslaved, but now they've come back into their land and it's become this great and beautiful thing. What has it become? The temple of God is what it's become. But how is Jesus utilizing this? He's saying, I am the stone that the builders have rejected, and I've become the foundation of the temple of God, where the people are brought into right standing before God, and God expresses his love and grace and mercy to the people. Where? At the temple. That's its purpose. So, if we're going to look at the illustration, what is the stone that the builders had rejected? It's Jesus. Who are the builders? They are the three groups: chief priests, scribes, and elders. Okay? These guys also have found identity in the vineyard discussion. The Son is the stone, is Jesus. The tenants are the builders. They are the priests, scribes, and elders. The illustrations, though different, follow exactly in line with one another. Only when we're talking about the stone that the builders rejected, what the people aren't realizing at the time when Jesus says this is, their rejection of him is his death. So what is marvelous, this is the Lord's doing and it's marvelous in our eyes, is a reference to the fact that this is the plan. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is the plan to make him the new temple. What's going to happen in this temple? We're going to need a priest, right? Who's the priest in this new temple that Jesus is? Jesus. Who is the expert in the law who leads his people in understanding God's truth? The scribe. Who is that? It's Jesus. Who are the elders? The one who interacts with the clans and interacts back with the religious leadership? The elder is Jesus. In fact, he's done one step better. He's taken it from being many clans to just one. We are one family of God, brought into close relationship with God in the temple, which is Christ. This is marvelous in our eyes. They don't understand that, and that's okay for the time being, but we had better understand the implications, and that's the third question. Once we see that the conversation is about who has the authority, which is Jesus, we have the next question of, now what are we talking about? Today, Jesus is that temple. He is that priest. He is the one who brings us in close relationship with God. But when we go back to the metaphor of the vineyard, he's also the vine dresser. Ironically, he's also the vine. Is that weird? He's not only the shepherd, he's the sheep who gives up his life. He's not only the God of the temple, he's the cornerstone of that temple in which we are built into it. How many different illustrations do we need to say that he has become all things? When we're talking about fruit, though, what does the fruit look like? Justice and righteousness enacted to God's praise and glory. The fruit of the church today is the worship of God. The fruit of the church today is the worship of Jesus because he has done all those things. That worship is not only a walking in righteousness for his glory, but a just living among one another to his glory as well. Which is why last week we talked about how the fruit of this is forgiveness and humility. We're talking about the same things here. How can a sinner interact with a sinner unless just forgiveness is our interaction? Believe it or not, you guys might be very beautiful people, but you're all sinners. I mean, that's an obvious statement. Are we willing to accept that? We better walk in justice with one another. We better walk in forgiveness with one another. We better walk in righteousness with one another. That's a steep call. That's a heavy weight. But guess what we have in the vineyard of Jesus? We have a vine dresser who produces fruit. It's not just a potential walking in righteousness and justice. It's an actual walking in righteousness and justice. He actually gives the thing that he's calling us to give. He actually produces the thing that he is making for us to do. After all, what does the Lord expect from you? But to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. What an amazing promise we have in the Son. Under his perfect leadership, we now can do what Israel for generations never could do. That makes Christ worthy of worship. Let's pray. Lord God, I thank you so much for sending your Son. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone of even this body. This is marvelous in our eyes. Lord, I pray that you would be working within each one of us today as we serve one another and as we love you in our daily lives. Lord, I pray that we would not take our eyes off of you, the one who does all things well. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.